And yet that's something that's been kind of passed on through generations. The old scars who just work in ridiculous circumstances and conditions and just get on with it. That's not the world we live in anymore, I'm afraid.
Welcome to the Ground Investigation Podcast, a show featuring interviews and insights from leaders in the geotechnical and geo-environmental business world. Join host Michael Taylor as he discusses the ups and downs of running a business in the GI industry, getting geological experts to share their learnings and lessons, as well as their plans for the future, highlighting what they think will improve the ground investigation industry moving forward. Now, here is your host, Michael Taylor.
We have a geology enthusiast with over 8 years of geotechnical and geohazard experience. They hold a bachelor's degree in earth science and currently pursuing a master's in engineering geology. In their career, they've tackled everything from mining cavities to karstic features as a senior geohazard engineer at Stantec. They've also made significant contributions to projects at Mason Evans Partnership. Please welcome our guest with a passion for geology and a dedication for making the earth more stable, Andy Wyllie.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
More than welcome. Okay, so I was wondering if you could just introduce yourself, really. Give us a sort of rundown of yourself and your experience so far.
Yeah, well, you did a pretty good job of it just there. My name is Andy Wyllie. I'm a senior geohazard engineer, currently working for Stantec in their Edinburgh office. I've been at my current role for about 2 years now, but I started my ground engineering career in a small consultancy called Mason Evans Partnership, based in Glasgow. Started back in 2014. Although I'm focused on geohazards now, the majority of my background is actually geotechnical and geo-environmental kind of fields, mostly working in association with the house building industry, but that is expanding now that I'm in Stantec.
Sure. So what attracted you initially to kind of going into the geology, geotechnical, and eventually geohazards industry?
I kind of fell into it, really. I ended up doing geology at university as my undergrad because I was into the outdoors and into rock climbing and all that sort of stuff. And then the original plan was going into mining, but that didn't work out in the end. So I ended up falling into it, and I've fallen in love with it since being in here. Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned mining. Is this, because one of the questions I was going to ask you now is, I see from your LinkedIn profile that you've worked in Australia, you've worked in the United States. What was the Australian adventure? Was that related to hopefully getting into the mining industry?
Yeah, so that was immediately after I graduated. We were told that Australia was the place to be for mining because it was taking off, particularly in iron and copper. And tin as well. So the plan was me and my friends would go out there and make our millions, and then come back. But we went out there in 2012, and that 2012, 2013 were really bad years in Australia for mining. So we timed it just about perfectly wrongly. We went out there and mining was down, and then basically just as soon as we left, the mining picked up again. But when I was out there, I ended up working as, well, you probably call them chain people over here, but a survey assistant out in Australia. So I kind of got a first foot into the construction industry through that, kind of by accident. But that's when I came home, I decided that's what I wanted to pursue.
Sure, we were sold the same dream, head off to Australia, mining industry, lots of money. That's why some of the people I was there with took on the course just for that. Really, I don't think many of them actually did go over there and do it. But it's funny, isn't it? So in geology, I think there's maybe, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, there's a good few of us anyway, but how many of them actually went into geology fields, whether it's geotechnical or mining, and how many of them just went off to do something completely different? Was it the same with you?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably about half and half. Basically, because I did my undergrad in Scotland, there's a big expectation that there's going to be a big pickup from people going into oil and gas in Aberdeen. So yeah, we had about a quarter of the class went into oil and gas, a quarter of us went into other engineering and geology aligned disciplines, and then half of us have gone away. But I mean, that's fair enough. I think the purpose of an undergrad a lot of the time is just to prove you've got something between your ears. Really, you can feel free to. I think a lot of people feel kind of pigeonholed, and I certainly felt that way when I was 17, picking my sort of courses at university and being really overwhelmed, thinking, God, I'm picking something at the age of 17, what I'm going to do until the day I retire. So there's a lot of pressure on people to stick with the industry. So I think it's a good message to get out there that you don't have to. Although I would recommend the geotechnical and engineering industry. It's brilliant. It's
very hard to make a decision because often you can kind of have to taper maybe A levels to get into a university. Potentially, my daughter's going through it at the moment. And as a dad, you're like, right, well, you need to pick this for this. But like, I don't know what I want to do. Like, no one does. but very few people actually do. But pick something, go towards it. If it changes, fine. At least you've got, you're doing something, you're progressing, and you're moving forward, essentially. So what prompted you to come back to the UK then? So you went to Australia, then went to USA. What drew you back to the UK?
Well, there was a kind of a combination of several factors. I think the biggest one was I was just homesickness, really. I've said I'm big into hill walking and rock climbing and things like that. And the sort of the recreational side of it didn't suit me personally. I'm not into surfing. I'm not into sitting on a beach. So I prefer the mountains, and Scottish mountains are brilliant. So I thought I'd come back. But there was a combination of things. I had my visa ran out, and I had a lot of personal things going on back home. So it was a bit of a perfect storm, really. I loved my time there. I'd go back and work in a heartbeat. It was really enjoyable, and it's a cool place to be.
Definitely. I think Australia seems lovely. We work with some clients over there and provided them with some candidates from the UK. But myself, it seems too hot. I know it's different depending on what region you're in within Australia. It's a very big place. But the UK weather is not so bad until you're away living somewhere hot. You kind of yearn for a bit of rain and a grey, cloudy sky.
Yeah, I spent a bit of time up in Darwin in Australia, right up in the north end, and it was, God, I didn't realise hotness until I'd been up there. I found out that if it's not 18 degrees on the button, I'm miserable.
Yeah, no, I don't. Even in the UK, 23, 24 maximum, 30 degrees. What's the point? Unless you're by the beach, you're on holiday. I'd rather not deal with 30 degrees. All right, so your master's dissertation focuses on landslide susceptibility models. For earthquake-induced landslides, could you just briefly explain your key findings and insights from your research?
Well, it's still a work in progress. So in terms of findings, that's a bit thin on the ground at the moment. But the actual principle behind it is that for people that aren't aware, when large earthquake events happen across the world, the real danger to them isn't necessarily the shaking of the earthquake itself. Tsunamis is one of them, and the other one is earthquake-induced landslides. So when events happen, thousands and thousands of landslides can occur and cause damage and hazards. So there's been a real move to try and push the relief efforts in this regard. So if you have a whole load of landslides occurring and you need to target areas where you want to dedicate relief efforts to, the impetus is always on making it as quick as possible to know where those landslides are occurring. And to date, it's still quite a slow process, surprisingly. It involves a lot of manual labour and a lot of assessment of the imagery from before and after the event, and automatically tries to identify where landslides are. So my research picks up on the back of that to see if we can use those models which show actual landslides locations or inferred landslides locations and use them to train a susceptibility model to predict where landslides are going to be. So a big part of that at the moment is there's two sort of competing sort of susceptibility map approaches, and I'm comparing the two to see which one performs best, and then with an aim to moving on to another stage of development, which is trying to develop a new one which has the best bits of the one that performs best, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. That sounds like something that AI can help with in the future, if not now, in terms of analysing the photographs, predicting, choosing the best model. Obviously, it still needs some human input, but it seems to be something that would be able to benefit from AI.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the logical progression of this. At the moment, we're just kind of basically seeing if it's feasible and if it's worthwhile pursuing. But so far, so good. Yeah, it looks like it is.
Okay, so can you tell me a little bit about what actually geohazards is in relation to geotechnical engineering, how it differs, what are the similarities?
Well, it's essentially a subdiscipline or a kind of specialisation of geotechnical engineering. It sort of lives in the gap between geotechnical engineering and engineering geology, really, where geotechnical engineers are interested in kind of properties and conditions of the superficial deposits, and the engineering geologists are interested in the condition of the bedrock. We are interested in both, as long as the problem represents a potential hazard to the development or environment due to surface instability or a surface movement risk. So the main difference I think I'd point out between geotechnical engineering and geohazards engineering is every project needs a geotechnical engineer. They're one of the most important people involved, their place, as it were. Whereas we get wheeled out where there's a bit more of a bespoke kind of risk, where it's not necessarily how the structure interacts with the ground and how you can support the structure, but it's how the Earth is behaving in its natural state and how we need to identify that and treat it before we even think about structures. I think the most layman way I can put it is it's essentially natural disaster engineering to an extent, but although that definition does expand into anthropogenic geohazards, such as coal mining risk assessment and things like that.
Sure. So why have you decided to kind of start to specialise in the geohazard side?
When I was a graduate and I first kind of fell into the world of geology, that's what everyone wants to do, isn't it? They all want to become volcanologists and natural disaster engineers until they realise how difficult it is and how academically, intensive it is and how competitive it is as well. So with my background in geotechnical engineering and geohazard engineering, I thought I'd kind of established myself in that sector and there wasn't much scope for movement. This offer came in from Stantec to be involved in their upcoming geohazard team. And I thought it was about as close as I can get to natural disaster engineering, but still with a commercial twist. There's still, an application, a financial application to it. So that's really cool. And when I saw that come in, I got really, really excited. And I've been excited ever since.
It's funny you should mention volcanology, because that was something I had an interest in, because I was thinking it was just going to be walking around volcanoes, maybe taking a few samples, etc. Until the tutors kind of said it's a lot of data-driven work. So in terms of you'll be looking at Excel spreadsheets a lot, which put me off, because that is definitely not me. I'd happily walk around it, but when it comes to Excel, that's definitely not for me.
Everyone sees the volcanologists or the natural disaster engineer. They're all standing at a crater rim and they're all, defying death, and it looks like Evel Knievel. So everyone wants a shot of it. But I've heard the reality is not quite as glamorous and exotic as that.
So can you provide some examples of projects where you've developed solutions for geohazard assessments or remediations?
So there's a few really. One of the big things that we're currently involved in is the development of our in-house debris flow predictor software. And it's a way of, when landslides occur, everybody seems to think it's the actual movement that's the issue, but a lot of the time it's the actual deposition state, which causes problems. So I've been very peripherally involved with the development of this software, where it helps model both the erosional and the depositional side of debris flows and landslides, we've just started to implement it on projects in the UK. It's really a North American thing where it's come from. But that's something that we're starting to wheel out into some of our projects. And it's filling a bit of a gap. I think there's been a few people who have been chasing this kind of technology for a while. And it's nice to actually see it put into effect. So that's one of them. Another one that we've got at the moment is we've had a project. I won't say where it is because it's still ongoing, but it's building where we've got dissolution. It's gypsiferous underneath the building, and it's showing signs of dissolution features appearing, and the building is starting. There's a risk that the building is starting to collapse. So we're trying to work out a way of treating that while keeping the building in place. So it's at its heart, it's a compaction grouting project, but it's extra complications and extra nuance to it. So that's a really cool one that's ongoing just now, and it's just such an interesting process to be involved in, to see this actually come up with solutions and see them implemented.
Sure. In your current role, how do you balance the technical aspects with the kind of project management role?
Well, I think this is probably one of my weakest areas, project management. I really, throughout my career, I've struggled quite a bit with it, and it's something that I really do. I don't think I've got the brain for it sometimes. I can't spin plates as well as a lot of people seem to be able to do. But fortunately, since moving to Stantec and a bigger consultancy, a lot of the projects that I'm currently involved in are more multidisciplinary, and a lot of them have specific project management staff who we can bounce off of, which has been an absolute lifesaver in a lot of cases, because in my old job I really did struggle. It was a thing that I really didn't like doing. Administrative stuff and project development and project management is really starting to take hold. So it's something that I'm actively working on just now to try and get better at. But with regards to leadership responsibilities, that's something that is a lot more sort of in my wheelhouse, I guess, because it's a lot more technical and it's a lot more kind of results delivered as opposed to contract delivered, I suppose. And it's just having a person under you who can absorb the information and take with it is brilliant. And I've been very lucky to have anyone that I've been kind of instructing or mentoring throughout my career has always been really good at taking advice on board and running with it.
I'm surprised you say it's more technical. I would have thought it would be more in terms of leadership, like having to inspire and enthuse, that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, I think I've been very lucky with the people that I've been kind of in them already, and I've not had to push them very far to become inspired and to want to do these cool things that we're doing. I've been very fortunate. There's a lot of knowing when this is probably going to get edited out, but my bold boss is to say it's knowing when someone needs a rocket up the arse or they need an arm around the shoulder. That's the biggest part of it. Just knowing what tactic to take. Because I feel like a lot of people want to help and they want to be good at things and they already have that desire to do that. So sometimes they don't know how, and sometimes they need a little bit of coercion. And it's keeping that in the back of your head is really important as well, to think that no one's out there to do a bad job,
Yeah, no, definitely. You noticed from your CV that you were a GIS technician as well. I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about what that entailed.
It was basically to inventorise and organise their equipment and to produce maps of what their equipment is and locations, because I think it was a bit of an ordeal to get it done in-house, so they subcontracted it to QC Data, and it was a cool job. There was a lot of people involved in it, and I think I'm going to get this wrong, but it's the largest Ofcom commission ever had that I was working on. So it was cool just to be part of a big operation like that, but it was just a big GIS course essentially that I was doing so I worked at that for about 4 months, and I felt like I was doing a module at university or something. It didn't feel like it was a job because it was just every day was learning. It was lucky that I got to experience that and get paid to do it, because it's really, I've brought it into my career, and GIS is such a useful skill to have.
What was kind of the day-to-day then as a GIS technician?
So essentially there's a big Excel worksheet to go through, and you basically have to attribute all of these pieces of equipment and all these old maps and things of where people have installed cables and pylons and things. And it was just extrapolating that data and it was basically a big administrative exercise, but because the GIS program is closely utilised in the ground engineering sector, it was super beneficial.
Okay, so how is it best used in ground engineering? What's the kind of application?
Well, at the moment we are using it. I discussed debris flow predictor and this sort of rollout into the UK. We've been working on a project up north in the northwest coast of Scotland, and it's a big hydro project, and we've been using it to basically present the information in an interesting way. And the applications of it are really malleable, should I say. There's so much in ArcGIS, and the capabilities of it are so huge. It's just phenomenal. Like, so for example, if you get a piece of data and it's a 40-year-old diagram that somebody's drawn, how the hell are you supposed to make that into any meaningful sense? So if you can put it into ArcGIS as a scan, and then you can rasterize it, you can turn it into digital information, which is valuable. You can actually compute it and make reasoned assessments about it instead of having to. It streamlines the process of having to analyze lots and lots of different pieces of information and kind of coordinate them together in your head. It's a way of digitizing that, keeping it together, and then processing it all in one place. And the capabilities of it are incredible. But every day someone says something to me, it's like, oh, did you know ArcGIS could do that? I'm like, no, I did not. It's just, it's crazy.
So apart from the GIS software, which you've used previously, can you give me any sort of specific softwares which you use in your current role or previous role?
So, I mean, these will be familiar to a lot of people. Sort of rock science is something that we use quite frequently, point of view. And Hobase as well, which is a Bentley program, I'm sure familiar to most people as well. And that's just good to, again, it's like ArcGIS, but for logs, essentially, where it's all compartmentalized and you can make a lot more reasoned assessment through it. But I think the one that takes the crowning glory is Leapfrog. It's something I'd never worked with until I started at Stantec, and it's one of those things you can't believe you functioned properly without it beforehand. It's, for geologists in particular, it's such a valuable thing because geology is at its heart a three-dimensional discipline. So a map only tells you 2/3 of the story. Okay,
could you tell us a little bit about Leapfrog then? I've never heard of Leapfrog. Maybe it'd be beneficial for the audience if you just let us know a little bit about it, how you use it.
It's a program it's now owned by Bentley, I believe, so it's part of the Hobase kind of suite of products. But it's essentially a 3D modelling software where you can input borehole data or ground data, surface data, whatever, and then it manipulates it into a three-dimensional model. And it's really just a visualization tool, but it's really cool. And I wish I had screenshots to share with you, because we used it on a project down in Bristol about this time last year it was, and it was a coal mining project where there's several coal seams, lots of shafts, lots of quarrying, lots of anthropogenic activity going on in this site, and we had on each of the drill rigs that we were doing our treatment grid on, all had measure well drilling, so it gives us live data from the drill rig, torque and penetration rates, and that was all. We could get that in real time and put that into this leapfrog model, and if we can coordinate that with what position it was that we were drilling at the time, we can create a 3D model based up entirely of the measure well drilling data. So you can have a 3-dimensional model of penetration rates. You can have a 3-dimensional model of torque, or, like weight on drill bit or whatever. Any of the things that are modeled in measure well drilling can then be put into this software. And that's such a cool tool because, we've all seen 3D geological blocks and models before, but to see something where it's how easy is it to drill through? Or where is the water? Where are we getting, if you put CPT holes down and get magnetometer results from it, where are the magnetometer deviations in relation to each other in 3 dimensions? It's a really valuable tool. And again, I cannot believe I lived my life as a professional geologist before having it.
Is it quite heavily used by the industry?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure because in my previous role, I'd heard of it, but I'd never used it. And every time, you bring it up just there saying you'd never heard of it, I get that quite a lot. So I expect it's probably not as utilised as it should be.
Definitely one that you would advise people should at least have a look at, see how it can help. How do you stay up to date with the latest advancements and trends in the geotechnical industry?
So being members of different governing bodies really helps. They do a lot of presentations, they do a lot of newsletters and things. So there's a lot of kind of information fed to me through that. And it's such a digestible format as well. They just send you an email with a couple of paragraphs worth of stuff. You read it once a week and then you're up to speed. But also within our company as well, we've got into the habit of doing monthly updates within our geo team where for each of our disciplines, we feed into kind of centre almost, where it's every week or every month, any new developments that are in the field of interest that we are particularly specialising in can get distributed to the wider team. And it's just a good thing. It keeps our libraries up to date and it keeps our, guidance. It means that we're all working from the same piece of paper, essentially. So they're probably the 2 biggest ones, but just you learn so much just by talking to people as well. Just going to make a cup of tea in the office and someone will say, "Oh, did you see the new guidance by whatever?" That's a really boring conversation, but it's an important conversation. And it's amazing just what you learn from being in that situation.
Sure. So in relation to the articles, where are they coming from? What is it? Industry magazines? Can you name a few? What would help people?
The 2 big ones, I suppose, that I get and I really enjoy and put some reliance on as well is Geoscientist magazine. So that's the publication of the Geological Society of London. And the other one is New Civil Engineer magazine, which is the ICE publication.
There's 2 or 3 podcasts which can be quite useful to listen to, which is not just a plug for this. There are some good podcasts in relation to ground engineering in general, such as pile, etc., some geotechnical engineering, which is, I think there's someone in America who does that, where it's slightly different because it's in America, but it still roughly has the same theme. People can still learn from it, from the projects and experiences of guests that go on there. So what I noticed was some experience that you've got as a writer for a travel magazine before entering the engineering field. How did that kind of help you contribute to your communication skills? Yeah, well, it was a bit of a jokey, kind of memoirish kind of articles that I was writing once a fortnight, print-only magazine. So it's probably not the most inspirational story for a writer, but it really helps. Just I got so many comments from what I was writing for me to explain things. And it was things that I thought were obvious, but maybe aren't quite as obvious to someone else, and I didn't realise that there was that kind of disconnect. So that's what's really helped me in this industry as well now, where I'm trying to explain complex situations and complex messages to clients, for example. And I need to remember that they might not know what I'm talking about and that they might need a little bit more hand-holding. So that's probably the biggest benefit that I've seen from it, just being able to appreciate what audience you're preaching to and what their background is compared to what yours is. Yeah, definitely. So I suppose if you're having to relay a technical aspect of a project to someone who's not quite technical or at all technical, then you have to be able to break it down into something that's digestible for your audience, I suppose. Well, that comes into the situation we talked about leapfrog just there. Communication tools like that as well are really essential in that. Yeah. So can you provide some examples of challenging projects that you've worked on in your career and what you've done to overcome them? Yeah, so there was a project that I worked on about 2.5 years ago, possibly. It was a very strange soil where it was a lot of silts, a lot of sands, a lot of gravels, and they were all kind of pocketed here, there and everywhere. So the hydrology was
insane. And it was almost impossible to work out without digging the whole site up and starting again. And we ended up targeting these areas of the slope through their guidance on it. But I just remember being really overwhelmed by that, just going, how the hell are we going to work this out? So that was a really interesting project. And again, you learn a lot just from introducing someone who's a specialist into it. And just listening to what they have to say. A cool one actually was, in my old role, we did a lot of jobs with distilleries up in the north of Scotland. And they were always really, really interesting projects because I was used to working in the house building industry where everything is, cost. That's your limiting factor. Your limiting factor is how much is this going to cost? Whereas in the distillery world, every moment that they spend of action is costing them money. So it's a change of mentality from, okay, how much is this going to cost to how long is this going to take? And that's a really interesting kind of a switch that you've got to flick in your head to try and figure that out. Because if you're now thinking, I need to get this done as soon as I possibly can, no holds barred, money is almost not an option. So I always really enjoyed those projects because it's a really good exercise in changing mindset.
Do you think that education is perhaps required there? Because to do the minimum obviously increases the risk long term without their project.
Yeah, definitely. So I can't remember what the saying is, but there's a famous saying in the geotechnical industry where it amounts to about 5% of your overall cost of a project, but the unknowns of it can amount to 2/3 of your cost if you get it wrong. It's important to communicate that. And again, you can understand where they're coming from because they're a business at the end of the day. They need to make it as profitable as they can. But sometimes you do need to explain the value of the engineering to them and say, look, this is going to cost you a lot more upfront, but we really don't need hassle in this particular arena because it's going to cost us a fortune if it turns out to be the case further down the line that something is wrong. So that comes back to communication again, though, because as engineering professionals, we can make a prediction on a site, and you could have a boring site where it's in glacial till and the site is basically pretty homogeneous, and you can make that kind of professional judgment, and you can maybe be a bit more lenient with the GI that you do and explain to the client that, the risks are a little bit lower in these kind of situations. But then you've got a site which is really complicated and it's been developed like 3 times already, and you essentially have no idea what's going on underneath this ground and what challenges you're going to encounter going down the line. And it's important to really make that clear and make sure the client understands what that risk is, because that's part of our package of support, I suppose. As consultants, we need to be the people who are knowledgeable about this stuff to give that to the client. And that communication is absolutely key to that.
Have you ever been part of the kind of quotation where the company have had to say, we're just not going to do it. It's not going to provide you with anywhere near the amount of data that you need. So we're not going to put our name to it because we don't want to come back later on and say this company done a grand investigation, but the cost was so restrained that you just can't really do it at all. Yeah,
I had one come in just last week, actually. It's very recent that we've decided we're not going to pursue, and it's for exactly that reason. It's a site in Edinburgh, quite near the centre of Edinburgh, and just with what's going on before and the uncertainties that are involved, it's either going to become prohibitively expensive for us to satisfy ourselves, or it's going to be something that we simply can't satisfy ourselves on. So we've had to step back. And I think it's okay to do that sometimes because that sends the developer a bit of a message to say, look, hold your horses here. Because every developer just wants to build. That's all they want to do. They just want to get building as fast as possible. And it's good to sometimes put the brakes on them a little bit and say, look, this is maybe a non-starter. Maybe you need to think about this one a bit more.
I think you're right. It's easy to kind of go gung-ho and let's build, but as we've seen throughout the industry, it can go wrong if you don't have a good enough ground investigation. Look into as many things, have as many boreholes as you need, then bad things can happen. You can end up making no money or making a loss or worse. So, can you explain the significance of surface instability assessment and their impact on construction projects?
Yeah, sure. So that's the surface stability assessment is probably the first port of call that we do in terms of geohazards specialisms, because it demonstrates that even if we don't know what's going on underneath the ground, we know that something is happening. So, for example, there's a project that I was involved in a few years ago where there was a quarry excavation which was being undertaken, and there's been a quarry excavated and it had been backfilled, and they now wanted to develop on it. And the first port of call was, well, let's have a look at the INSAR data and the ground monitoring data to see if we've got movement. Because, it'd been backfilled about 50 years ago. Any settlement that was going to have taken place is probably taken place by now. But so if we go and look at the INSAR data and it turns out that it's not moved in the last 5 years or whatever, that we can have some degree of confidence that the settlement has probably occurred and it's probably not going to settle much more. However, if it comes back and it says, yeah, this, and it needs to be looked at in a bit more detail. So that's probably the biggest benefit to a surface stability assessment that I can see. And it's just become our bread and butter, really, for every project that geohazards are involved in, because it's the first port of call to say, is there an issue here? Do we need to progress this further?
So in your role, you've worked on mining cavity assessments. Can you share some of your insights into some of the challenges and solutions when dealing with underground mining issues?
Yeah, so this is actually something that Stantec, or Peter Brett before they became Stantec, we're really kind of at the forefront of in the UK. We have a database in-house, which is the cavities database, we call it, and it basically covers all chalk and gypsiferous and dissolution features in the UK. Well, we've got a good inventory. It's not all of them, but we've got an inventory of these sort of features. So we do these quite a lot. And it's funny because it's this huge part of my job now, but it's something that I never looked at until I started at Stantec, because I didn't know chalk existed. At Mason Evans, I was working in Glasgow. It's glacial till on top of carboniferous deposits. Like, that's all I ever work with. It was cool to experience that, but there's such a challenge because it's now become, there's almost no rhyme or reason to an extent. It's dissolution will kind of occur where it wants to occur. And therefore that often informs the mining later on. So there's a great deal of challenges involved with it. And it's something that I struggled with a little bit at the start, just trying to get my head around it. But once you know the philosophies, and we've got an in-house specialist, Dr. Clive Edmonds, who's Dr. Chalk, we call him. He's one of the UK leaders in karstic landscapes. And he's just been absolutely brilliant in presenting this in a sensible way and producing sort of risk tables for this kind of environment, which usually would be quite difficult to do because, like I say, it doesn't necessarily follow any. So yeah, it was such a benefit having him on the team, kind of explaining things to me and getting me up to speed on it.
So you mentioned about a database of karstic features, dissolution features, that sort of thing. Is there one that's kind of free and open to all the other companies, or is that just something that Stantec have created for themselves?
There's certain people who have access to it through licenses. So, for example, people like EnviroCheck and GroundSure, they use their information. The information that you get in their reports has information from our cavities database on it. And we do offer bespoke reports for each site if you're interested in doing it, which are a one-off essentially, and we can provide data from the cavities database. But unfortunately, no, it's quite a valuable commercial tool. So I'm afraid there's no easy open access version.
Okay, so what are some of the most pressing challenges in the geotechnical and geohazards industry at the moment?
Well, certainly up my neck of the woods is the value of land is really shot up. So there's a temptation to start developing land which would usually have been considered unfeasible or unadvisable has really come to the forefront. An example of which is, I don't know if you're familiar with them, the edge coals of Midlothian. So it's an area just east of Edinburgh. And it's a coal seams that are all carboniferous strata lined up together, but they've been tipped so they're essentially vertical. And it's essentially like treating a big long mine shaft. So it's a difficult technical challenge, and it's something that's financially and labour-wise quite intensive. So this bit of land is sat essentially derelict for years because it's been too difficult to remediate and then eventually develop. So the parcels of land like this are starting to come into the forefront, and we're having to produce more and more detail and more bespoke kind of solutions to these things to address them. For example, in the edge coals that I was talking about, I was involved with a project there a few years back now when I worked for Mason Evans. They were treating the coal seams, but we had to be super careful with the grouting, and we were using quite detailed keeping detailed logs of what was going into the ground and trying to keep detailed models of the ground to see if we were losing any grout. And we just had to keep a very detailed tally on what we were expecting to go in and what actually was going in. Because if you're losing grout anywhere, it could be going miles into the bowels of the earth for all we know. And that's just, a waste of resources and a waste of time. So that's something that we're really struggling with now, which is these pieces of land that are coming in that are really, they're developable now that we've got the kind of more recent technology, but they really haven't been in the past, and they're presenting their own challenges.
Like for the developers, it sounds quite expensive, but for the companies going through the remediation and investigations, it sounds quite good. You kind of got a balance there, which is not great for them, but lots more work provided potentially to the geotechnical and geoenvironmental industry.
Yeah, I mean, and it's good that there's a kind of message being sent that these lands have been undevelopable for some reason. it puts a bit of an onus on making sure you do a detailed assessment and really kind of cross your T's and dot your I's when it comes to the investigation works.
Okay, so we're going to move on to something a little bit different now, which is mental health in the industry. So you mentioned the importance of changing attitudes towards mental health in the construction and engineering industry. Could you share some past experiences with?
Yeah, so I think my experience is probably similar to a lot of people listening. I think just about everyone that's listening to this has probably had some involvement, whether it's themselves or whether through colleagues or friends close to them, regarding their mental health. In fact, I heard a statistic quite recently which really shocked me. It's construction and, by association, ground engineering industry has a suicide rate of 5 times greater than all the other UK industries combined, which is insane. Whatever way you paint this, there's something fundamentally wrong in the way we're operating if that's the case. But yeah, go back to my experiences. My experience is fairly mild, something that a lot of people can probably associate with on an almost daily basis. Basically, it came up to pressures and deadline pressures from people who needed things done very quickly, putting stress on us and generally being understaffed. So that just came down to a matter of stress for me, and I've had to take some time off in the past to deal with that. But still speaking personally, but of other people, I know someone who's, and they basically threw their career away because they had stresses that mounted up and they went unaddressed for too long, and they eventually couldn't see a way past it because the industry wasn't kind of taking them seriously enough. They were working on site a lot, and I think that the attitudes of the people on site were kind of traditional insofar as they were talking about, stiff upper lip, just don't talk about your feelings, just keep calm, carry on kind of thing. And it went on for too long and he couldn't see a way past it. So he left the industry, and he was a brilliant talent. And we've lost the opportunity to keep this person who really could have done some great work in the industry. And that's whenever there's a financial incentive for companies to do something about mental health and to take it as seriously as they should be. That's it. Like you're losing these, you've got a smaller pool of folk to choose from because your people are going to go elsewhere.
Finding the right staff is hard, really hard. At GI Rec Limited, we understand the ground investigation market inside out and can make all the difference to your recruitment woes. You need to concentrate on running the business, which is very difficult to do without the correct number of qualified staff. We can help you get your time back and lower your stress levels. We only work with talented, referenced, and often entirely exclusive candidates across the ground engineering sector. Wouldn't that be nice? It's not a dream, it's a reality for many of our happy customers. Get in touch with the team now to book a call. Just email info@girec.co.uk to book a call, or click the link in the show notes now.
Mental health is seen as more of a priority.
I suppose it helps from my point of view in terms of the contracting route or the consultant route. Consultant route generally appears to me, at least, I've never been a consultant myself. Actually, I was for a short period of time. But there's some office time. There's generally the hours are not nowhere near as much as the contracted. Generally, you're not staying away, being away from home for long periods of time. There's still some driving involved, but it definitely seems not the easiest side of the industry, but maybe perhaps the more sympathetic, the more kind of work-life balance side of it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That doesn't by any means mean that it's good, but let me correct that. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's perfect, but you're definitely saying the right things. That the site work is definitely the more susceptible to these kind of problems, and it's things like spending long times away from home and family, long driving hours, and just difficult circumstances to be in. And of course, those sort of attitudes tend to be found more in the site side of things, whereas consultancies and office work seems to have adopted it a bit better to the forefront. But that doesn't mean they don't exist in the definitely. Consulting realm.
When you think of the drillers in the industry, they never have office time. They might have a bit of yard time, I suppose, if their rig isn't out. There's something like that going on, but they're always away. They're always digging away, travelling crazy amounts of miles. They all seem to go from come down from Scotland to somewhere in England, and then you see the ones going from England to somewhere in Scotland. Why don't you just go and work there? We'll work here, and that's better for everyone. At least they can maybe get home at night and see their loved ones.
Yeah, everyone has a zone. Yeah, because you're absolutely right. I know. I saw a thing on LinkedIn from one of the better known drilling contractors in the UK, and it's people who have been up in the Hebrides in the north of Scotland, and then the next day they're down in Leeds or something, and that's an incredible distance to travel just in basically not in a day, overnight. It's difficult, and there's a lot of pressures on contractors to deliver as quickly as possible, and be available is at the drop of a hat. So I think there's definitely an internal issue here as well, with this great demand on particularly contractors, but to consultants too, to an extent, to get everything done, yesterday, which adds to
you're right. I think
mental
some
stresses.
of it must eventually come down to cost, because if your margins are low, if you have a drilling rig out of action just for one day of the week, then how much does that affect potential profitability for the entire week? Because you still have to pay the team, you still have all the costs outgoing. So it makes me wonder whether some of it must be down to some of the companies who just make less margins than others. Some of the companies have a good brand, etc., so they can charge more to their clients, really focus on health and safety, that sort of thing. But the others who don't do that and just go by cost, they're really going to be the worst affected, and their staff and along with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky situation, and everything you said makes a lot of sense. I guess it's the onus is on the individual to an extent, where they've got to speak up about certain things if they are struggling. Because a lot of people, I've met jobbers who absolutely love the lifestyle, and they just love driving about and going to different parts of the world every day. I feel like there's definitely an onus for recognition within an individual or within a group of individuals working on site to highlight whether or not there's an issue and spot it in someone else as well. If you see that someone else is struggling, you need to be proactive and speak to them about it and see if everything is going as well as they say that it's going. It's an attitude change which really needs to take into place here.
And it doesn't help that the majority of the industry are men, and men are not usually the best at discussing their feelings. Potentially why it's better to have more women to be in the industry. But it's partly related to men, I would imagine, as well, because like I say, we're not the best.
Well, the mindset of men is more stiff upper lip, just get on with it kind of thing. And yet that's something that's been kind of passed on through generations. The old guard who just work in ridiculous circumstances and conditions and just get on with it. That's not the world we live in anymore, I'm afraid. We need to look after ourselves.
Can help, and the industry, because you see some things occasionally and they address it, but I don't see what's changed. Maybe it's just from my point of view. How do you think that it can be addressed on a practical day-to-day basis by the industry?
Well, again, I think it needs to come mostly down to the individual to be aware of these issues in the industry, both for themselves and for the people that they're working beside. They also need to put the employee needs to put more of an onus on the employer to an extent as well, because an employer, often you can get the situation where they'll hand out a leaflet with a phone number on it, kind of go, there, that says tick the box for mental health wellbeing. Whereas if you're struggling, there needs to be a bit more of a definite onus put on the employer to be like, look, no, I need more support than just you pointing me in the direction of a phone number. Because if it is a particularly bad case, you will end up going to someone like Breathing Space or Scottish Association for Mental Health, or whatever the English equivalent of that is. You might end up having to go down that route anyway, but in the first instance, it's worth speaking to your employer to say, look, I'm identifying this as an issue. It might not be just me. It might be a lot of people. We need to discuss it. We need to talk about what actionable things we can do to try and sort this. And appreciate that there's situations that are probably easier to solve than others, but I think that's the main point that we need to get across, that everyone at grassroots level needs to be aware of mental health in this industry and its kind of bad track record, to bring it up to speed with a lot of other industries who are treating it well. Not that the construction industry isn't treating it seriously. It's just there's different challenges to overcome, and I think sometimes they're better addressed head on than sweeping them under the carpet.
Prevention's better than cure. It's better to deal with it early stages and from the grassroots, like you were saying, rather than it get to a critical point where, I suppose, even from a company's point of view, even in terms of if an employee feels too stressed, like you were saying you did earlier on, and then they're taking time off, that has an impact on the company if they're concerned about, one, how they're viewed in the industry and by clients, but two, their profitability.
We made the change with physical health and safety, but it's a logical progression, and I don't think the challenges that are faced with mental health first aid is massively different to those faced with physical first aid.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think in relation to the mental health versus the physical health, the health and safety, you can see when someone's broke their thumb or cut themselves or fallen over and broken their knee. Whereas the mental health, it can be hard to see as well, can't it? Because someone could be going through quite a bad time and just still say like, yeah, no, everything's fine. And it's quite hard to see. It's not as easy to see as a bandaged up arm, at least.
Yeah. But this comes down to awareness and well, it's a bit of a cliche, but breaking the stigma a little bit about mental health.
Okay, so in relation to the modernisation of the industry, so you were saying the industry's tendency is to hold on to tradition, particularly in sort of the housing sector. Can you provide some examples of how the traditional mindset is hindering progress?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily hindering progress, but it's certainly not open to, or less open to, innovative ideas, because again, we talked about this earlier, particularly house building, they don't want to be worrying about whether or not something will work. So if something has worked for them in the past, and they're quite happy to go with the formulaic approach of just doing that again, not realising there's maybe a better approach. And again, this comes down to us as consultants communicating the ideas better and saying, right, well, there is this alternative solution, could produce this, or this. It could be faster, it could be better ground conditions at the end of it, or whatever. We've got to be able to offer those options up to house builders, to developers, but they also have to be willing to take it on. So, for example, there's a project that I'm peripherally involved in, and there's talk of, it's an open cast backfill, and there's talk of remediating the backfill. So the approaches that we've basically come down as consultants is either surcharging it, so putting a big load of material on top of it and forcing it to settle, or a kind of innovative technique which is used quite often in North America but not in the UK, which is explosive compaction, which is essentially drilling lots of boreholes, putting explosive charges down them, exploding them in sequence, and then it instantly settles the ground. And it's something which is totally new to the UK, and it's really innovative, but it probably ticks all the boxes in terms of what the developer needs. It's presumably cheaper, it's quicker, could give you a better result at the end of it. But there's this red tape of getting it through the insurer, getting everybody on board. There's a bit of an upfront hassle factor associated with it, and a lot of the time that seems to be unnecessary hassle, unnecessary effort used for something which they could just do what they've done all the time and just get on with it. So I think that's an interesting discussion to be had, and to see how we can start to implement innovative things to this world, because I feel like we've been resting on our laurels in the UK for a little while. We developed most of geotechnical engineering in the turn of the century. We're kind of going, oh yeah, well, we've done all this. We can kind of lean back and relax a little bit now, but it's good to keep the pressure on and keep developing and keep things as efficient as possible.
Companies that innovate, I mean, you kind of have to innovate, really. I suppose every idea is not going to be perfect, but however, through the process of innovation, you can increase. Think of, even in methods of conducting certain field work, thinking of trial pits, for instance. I'm not sure if this is the best example. There are most of the companies, and they'll do a trial pit, you'll stand by it. However, you've got the risk of fall from height, which is classed. And there are other companies which I've worked with, and kind of a trestle, barriers right the way around it. So the chances of you falling in is very much reduced. However, the cost of that and how many you can actually get done, that's a major problem. So I don't really think that's the best idea. I think there has to be something better than that to come out to increase the safety standards of conducting a trial pit. I suppose it comes down to relaying the message again as well. You know, the benefits of new technologies, to clients that might be hesitant to embrace a certain change.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to start poking fingers, but you look at the CP rig, for example, and you go, why are we? There's got to be something more, technologically advanced than essentially hammering a tube into the ground. I mean, yeah. I respect it, and it's a difficult job, and it gives you what you need, but it's a very labour intensive and I think a bit of a brutal job for the person doing it, and it's quite a slow process. I feel like there's definitely scope for exploring alternative avenues for things that better for the driller and better for the consultant as well. So, I mean, for example, something that baffles me is home penetrometers. They were developed in the 50s. Like they're still kind of, it's a bit of a push to get them used on site. And they're brilliant because they give you can put all these different attachments on it. You can find out exactly what you need to find out. And there's very little ground disturbance. And plus the people doing them get to sit in the back of a truck with a heater all day instead of in the pouring rain.
Point. I've had the privilege of supervising one of them, and it was fantastically light duties, to be honest, compared to logging soil from a CP rig. But again, you mentioned CP rig there, and I suppose a large amount of factors. One, they have a use, but two, it must, some of the reasons must be cost at the end of the day, because they're cheaper per day than a rotary rig. for instance. It's simple to do, but yet it is a very laborious task for the driller, and especially the second man as well.
Yeah, it's also a very dangerous procedure. I think it's the most dangerous piece of kit in ground investigation, if I remember reading that at some point. I mean, necessity drives innovation, though. Sometimes you've got to shake it up a little bit to bring the cost down. Like, if from a commercial aspect, if you start saying that you're going to use CPTs from now on, the price will come down because people will make it competitive. It's just shaking up the tradition. There's a lot of kind of, that's the way we've done it before, so we'll continue to do it that way.
So throughout your experience, have you already kind of read any books, seen any documentaries, any resources for geotechnical engineering that you could recommend to anyone that's interested in learning more about the field?
Yeah, well, I mean, I listened to your interview you did about a month ago now with Louisa Hendry. She's the Scottish geologist on Instagram. She's brilliant. She's just a very good, digestible way of taking a sort of minute and a half out of your day to learn about rocks. It's brilliant. But there's two books that are always on my shelf, and they're not particularly technical books. There's one by Con Gillan called Geology and Landscapes of Scotland, and it is just super digestible. And there's another called Granite and Grit by Ron Turnbull, which covers the UK and some of Northern Europe. It's just a really interesting way of learning about how the rocks interact with each other.
You mentioned
what that means for geotechnical engineering.
Yeah, so that was a couple of podcasts ago, so you should go and check that out if you haven't already. But yeah, I mean, she TikTok, and I think it's on Instagram as well. But yeah, very digestible. She does it in a very upbeat way, so her personality comes across, which is fantastic as well. And they're very bite-sized. You can sit there, which I've done the same with Saskia as well, Saskia Elliott, and you can just sit there and just flick through one after the other, and it will take. I try to get my kids to kind of watch them as well to have a little bit of an interest, but it's a great way for younger people to perhaps become inspired and interested into either just general geology, which can lead into our industry, or whether it's a little bit more technical as well. With the issues of some of the A-levels providers and now some of the universities stopping to provide the qualifications required and the courses required, hopefully it can have an effect on that, really, and it could inspire more to come into the industry.
It's a cool industry. Got a good sales pitch for it. It's brilliant.
What advice would you give
you're ever thinking about it,
to an aspiring geotechnical professional who's looking to make a meaningful impact into the industry?
I think the best one that I've got is give everything a crack. If there's an opportunity for a cool project or a piece of work which is new to you, have a go. You learn so much just by putting yourself in those environments and just kind of absorbing it. Similarly as well, take notes. Like, don't do what I did when it comes to making chartership applications and things like that, CVs. It's always good to have of everything that you've worked on a day-to-day basis. So do not do what I did and leave everything to the last minute and try and sift through 6 years worth of information to try and figure out what the hell goes in a chartership application. But finally, and I think most importantly, is make sure you give yourself a pat on the back for things that you think are difficult. Because I mean, I've been in this industry for 8 years, coming up to 9 years now, and just about every single day of my life I have to do meetings, and they still give me a lot of anxiety. They still, I don't think I come across particularly well sometimes in meetings, so I find them really difficult. And it's good just to come out of them and go, you got through another one, well done. And everything is, if it's challenging, it's doing you good. So I think that's my golden tip. Pat yourself in the back when you need to.
Step outside your comfort zone. It's scary, but it does help you grow if you do want to grow and get better. Like you say, for the meetings, that might not be your most comfortable place. However, the more you do it, you will build up some more resilience in terms of you'll become a little bit more comfortable. It still might not be your ideal setting, but if you never went to any, sometimes it's the mind. You're terrified to go into the meeting, then after it, that wasn't as bad. And as you kind of get, I suppose, put on the spot, asked a really technical question, you have no idea of the answer to anything. That was worse than I. Could you share some, either project or some kind of developments in the geotechnical sector which are currently involved in or excited about for the future?
Oh God, where to start? How long have you got? There's always something exciting going on everywhere. It's a minefield of cool and exciting things. I think probably the one that is exciting me most is, and it's something I'm very peripherally involved in, I'm not directly involved with it, but is Quarry Glass. So it's the new hydroelectric plant up in the north of Scotland, and it's done under a joint venture of ourselves and Covey. And it's the first, let me get this right, it's the first hydroelectric station built in 60 years in the UK, I believe. So there's a lot of chatter about it in the industry, and it's cool because it's multidisciplinary and it's obviously huge in terms of its scale and reach. So that's the sort of stuff that gets me really excited, the stuff that's massive and it has national implication. Yeah, I think that's probably the one I'm most excited about now.
Okay, so now we're pretty much to the end of the podcast. We're going to introduce a new feature, which is 5 quickfire questions. So, if you could time travel back to any geological event, which one would you pick?
This is probably a very straightforward answer, and I'm afraid I don't have anything better for you. But I would really like to settle the argument of what killed the dinosaurs. That'd be good.
On geology-related superpower, what would it be?
Oh, actually, this is good because I'm really bad at mineralogy. So if I could look at a rock and determine its mineralogy and its composition straight off the bat.
What would you prefer, site work or office work?
Site work, definitely. It's the site work is the fun bit. That's the cool face. That's where you're actually learning stuff, absorbing.
What movie can you think of that has lots of cool geology landscapes?
We used to do, when I was doing my undergrad, we had a night at the Geological Society, and it was bad geology film night.
Yeah.
And the one that always came up was the core. You ever seen that? It's they travel to the centre of the Earth to drop nuclear bombs to get the thing restarted. And it's brilliant. Such a good one. And watching it I remember watching it as a child and going, this is brilliant, but watching it as a professional, this is probably teaching us the wrong things about the Earth.
Yeah, it's so ridiculous, to be honest. Okay, so the final question is, what do you prefer, geo-environmental or geotechnical?
I prefer the geo-environmental side because there's more development and it's constantly changing. You've got to be on the top of your game.
Thanks very much for your time today, Andy, and coming on the podcast as a guest. I hope you've enjoyed yourself.
Yeah, I really have. It's been good fun. I was really nervous at the start, but it's you've calmed me down well. You've been a good host.
Better each time. Thanks very much for spending the time or taking the time out of your day in coming on. Thanks again. See you soon.
Yeah, thanks. See you soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ground Investigation Podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, then please support the show by leaving it a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts. For more information on what was discussed in this episode, click the link in the show notes now.